the last decade has seen the UK tech scene explode with more startups founded than ever before. And the UK is now a leader in Europe in terms of funding and in terms of the number of billion-dollar tech companies. Britain hasn't yet built its first Google, but it does have a really impressive crop of young startups, from fintech to healthcare, in cybersecurity and in semiconductors, and a really vibrant ecosystem of startups and venture capital firms, many with links to our universities and colleges. 2020 has, of course, been an incredibly challenging year for all businesses, but one really encouraging trend, which we have been following, has been the remarkable resilience of Britain's tech startups. We're going to talk about that a little bit more tomorrow, but these companies have been raising more money and expanding their activities this year despite an otherwise grim economic environment. But amid tremendous economic uncertainty and recession, startups are now feeling the pressure. So I'd like to welcome my colleague, Harry De Quetteville, the Telegraph's special technology correspondent, to join us. He's going to be taking the next panel, which is on starting a business during a recession. Harry, you just oversaw the production of our Tech Hot 100 list, which is a list really of Britain's top 100 tech startup founders. And it kind of feels like there was an embarrassment of riches on there. Just the variety of companies, the diversity of businesses from fintech to healthcare to AI. What were the key lessons that you drew from producing that?
Well, thanks very much, Robin, and thanks so much, everybody. Welcome to the next couple of days of events. I think it's going to be very exciting. We've got fantastic panelists. Yes, that Tech 100 list, we had a huge amount of diversity, the sectors which companies are going into, and the endurance which they're showing in a period when so many other companies are really going to the wall. We're seeing from drug discovery using artificial intelligence, I mean, super technical things, all the way to e-commerce, gym clothes flying off the shelves and creating companies worth hundreds of millions, billions, and the people behind them worth huge amounts too. And it's a real transformative moment, we all understand, in our economy. I mean, just being at home yourselves, you'll notice that you're clicking more, you're buying more, it's all coming to your door. The logistics of how things get from warehouses to your front door, supply chains are changing, the digitization of every sector from travel to transport to e-commerce to commerce, sales, retail, how things respond. I think we've seen a quickening, an acceleration. This is the accelerating moment when tech has really grasped and its moment to shine, because what we were all asking ourselves, I think, before this year was we had the status quo, and we had technology which was tech companies which were challenging the status quo, but could tech companies take over completely if the status quo wasn't around to operate? And I think what we've found this year is that the understudies, e-commerce taking over from bricks and mortar retail, e-estate agents taking over from bricks and mortar estate agents, the same in medicine, the same in healthcare, the same in transport, the same in whatever sector you like, the understudies have taken the stage and shown that they can really perform when we needed them to. And that is a remarkable moment. And I think so many people's confidence in the sector has just been taken to the next level. We as consumers, I'm sure we'll hear from venture capitalists that their confidence as investors, and clearly the markets, we've seen stock markets, particularly in America, the NASDAQ really exploding as traditional companies fade. Sadly, many of them with, we shouldn't forget the human cost of that, of so many companies going to the wall in traditional sectors, but tech companies booming. And we will see so many exciting things as a result of that. I mean, take healthcare. Healthcare is a sector which traditionally you need a market. Look at the Pfizer announcement today. The biggest market in the world is for a coronavirus, a COVID-19 vaccine. But there are many, countless, very, very rare diseases which just get underfunded traditionally because there isn't effectively a market for those treatments. But of course, if you have those rare diseases, it's a life-affecting and potentially life-ending condition. And technology can lend its resources to explore every avenue of healthcare, not just the big avenues. And we're seeing that across the board, tech really take over. Our Tech 100 list was an exemplar of that. We're going to talk to a lot of people, and then of course the next couple of days we're going to bring you every facet of that tech revolution, from why you should start your own startup, how you can do that, to healthcare, the health tech revolution, fintech. It's going to be very exciting. We've got access to the very finest minds. And so I really am excited now to get down and start this 2-day tech extravaganza. And the first panel that we can go to is going to be about the future of work. So I'm just going to ask Robin his thoughts about that, and whether, Robin, obviously we've seen in the last, even today, unemployment figures booming for the traditional sectors. And I suppose this panel will help us show that that tech can perhaps replace some of those difficult unemployment figures.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're obviously very alarming to see some people who are the victims of this disastrous pandemic, out of work. It's extremely worrying, but I think there is, what we hope from this event is that we will offer a bit of hope in an otherwise gloomy economic landscape. That there are in the UK some really exciting, innovative companies that are building very successful businesses at scale and have the potential to be world-beating companies. So far, the UK has not. I mean, the UK has got a really successful, vibrant tech startup scene. We've been less effective at scaling those businesses to global companies. That's where Silicon Valley has a kind of has an edge over us. But nevertheless, we're getting there. And I think with every year that goes by, there's this sort of pool of greater experience, greater understanding of how to build businesses. There's a whole universe of venture capitalists. There's just a greater sort of a greater ecosystem is the term that people in the industry like to talk about. But a greater ecosystem of expertise and funding that I really am very optimistic that we will see some of these companies get to the next level.
Fine. Well, let's crack on then with the first panel. It's going to be about surviving the shakeout, why you should launch a startup during a recession. Many people, of course, will have found themselves accidental entrepreneurs. They would have been furloughed or made redundant in these last few terrible months. And with their great entrepreneurship, their skills, thought about, can I start my own company? Maybe they wouldn't have done it previously, but now maybe that's the way they're going. And to talk about it, we've seen the tech scene explode in the UK in the last 10 years, showing great examples of what people can do. So, what should you do if you want to start a startup? How do you go about it? What are the great tips to offer? We have got a fantastic panel with some fantastic advice coming up. With me is Alice Bentinck. She's MBE, co-founder and general partner of Entrepreneur First. Entrepreneur First invests in top technical individuals to help them build world-class tech companies from scratch in 6 locations, not just here, but in Europe and in Asia. Since 2011, EF has created more than 200 startups worth $1.5 billion plus, including Magic Pony Technology, Tractable, and Cloud NC. EF's investors include LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman and Greylock Partners, alongside Mosaic Ventures, Lakestar, and Founders Fund. And Alice, of course, also set up Code First Girls Not-for-Profit that's helped more than 5,000 women to code for free while at university. And of course, coding and STEM skills are such critical parts of moving on to allow everyone to have access to tech entrepreneurship. With us also is going to be Eileen Burbidge, I hope. She's a partner at Balderton Capital, the preeminent early stage technology venture fund based in London. And she brings huge experience from her investment activities, gleaned from business and product roles at Yahoo, Skype, and Apple, and elsewhere. And she also serves on as a non-exec on a number of fast-growing companies, including Monzo, Digital Shadows, Button Up Box, and Marshmallow, among others. In addition to Passion Capital, Eileen is the Treasury Special Envoy for FinTech, appointed by the Chancellor, and Tech Ambassador for the Mayor. I mean, her list of qualifications just goes on and on. It's almost too long to read, Eileen. You're too qualified. We can't have someone so qualified on. It's fantastic. But and she is on the board of Dixon's Carphone as well. Now, James Wise, our final guest on this, is a partner of Balderton Capital, the largest early-stage venture capital firm in Europe, where he invests in new technologies focused on productivity and healthcare. He sits on the board of 8 companies spanning sectors from genomics and cybersecurity to sustainable clothing marketplaces. Prior to joining Balderton, James helped to launch and run one of the UK's first social impact funds, the Social Business Trust. In 2011, he served as a specialist advisor, I should say, to Parliament on social enterprise and charity. So welcome all 3 of you. It's fantastic to have you all here, so qualified. I practically ran through the whole session taking my time to read your intros. Your biographies are so qualified. I want to start off by getting right to it and running through the 3 of you and asking you each in turn how the pandemic has affected business as usual in your sector. So if we start with you, Alice, you deal at EF with people who want to become founders. Maybe they come from other careers. You might stop being a doctor and say, I want to be an entrepreneur. How do I do it? And you back the very finest talent, the most driven founders. But that's right at the sort of start of the creation of tech companies. How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected the people you see coming through your door? Are there more people wanting to be entrepreneurs, fewer people wanting to be entrepreneurs? Is there more talent, less talent? What are you seeing?
So 2020 has been a sort of emotional ride for us. As you were saying, what we do is we go out and we find the world's most talented individuals and help them build a startup. Now, at the point where they're applying to us, they typically don't have a team or an idea. So this really is, in many ways, one of the sort of earliest stages of venture capital. At the beginning of 2020, we were very worried that we would see a crash in applications this year. We were across Europe and we're across Asia. We're now in Toronto as well. And I suppose our assumption was that we would see a fall in applications in all sites as people become more risk averse, as people see declining opportunity. What has surprised and delighted us is that actually many people have seen the pandemic as a driving factor to try and make change and to have impact. We've actually seen increases in applications across all of our sites. One of the most interesting things for me has been in London, for example, we've seen an 8% increase in applications across the board. But within women, we've seen a 36% increase in applications, which, to be honest, at the moment, I don't know what the why is behind that, but really, really interesting to see that we're seeing more people than this point last year taking that plunge, taking that leap, quitting their job to become a founder, to become an entrepreneur. And really, the reason, my sort of hypothesis behind why this is that most of the individuals that come to us want to become a founder so they can have impact, and often some sort of positive impact on the world. And I think we can all agree at the moment that the world has never needed more positive impact to happen. And really, becoming a founder, starting a startup, is one of the most high leverage ways to have a positive impact on the world.
So these aren't necessarily accidental entrepreneurs who've been furloughed or made redundant and thinking, what should I do now?
No, typically it's not. Typically it's still people either coming out of academia or quitting their jobs or coming out of their careers because they want to be an entrepreneur and they want to have positive impact, and they see the vehicle of a startup as being the way to do that.
And Eileen, over to you. For those in the business already and perhaps looking to raise some capital for maybe their first or second raise, what's been the impact on those smaller businesses, maybe an A round or a B round, who are just really looking to get underway? Are they finding capital harder to get to? What's the environment like for startups now?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with Alice and James and to be chatting about this, because I think it's so important and it's been such a pivotal year. I'm going to try and not say the unprecedented word. So I think it's really fascinating to talk through what lessons are learned and where we're going from here. In terms of your question, I do think fundraising was severely impacted in Q2 and maybe for the earliest part of the third quarter as well. But what we're seeing now is that fundraising and financing, capital flows, they're almost back to normal, and in some cases even more robust than they were before the pandemic. So I think the conclusion is that we saw companies, founders, and entrepreneurs have to take stock at the end of Q1, early Q2, think about their cash conservation, think about what their plan was, think about their employees and the well-being for all of their teams first and foremost, and then think about a plan to move ahead. And while we're here, in the midst of a second wave, and who knows if there'll be a third wave or if we'll sort of see some relief from some of these vaccines or not, I do see capital flows running again.
And was that just a structural thing where people were, like the rest of us, getting used to making deals on Zoom? I mean, it's hard enough to dial into a work meeting on Zoom, but if you're going to commit $50 million to a company on Zoom, that's quite another thing. So was it that just getting over that behavioral hurdle, or was it actually that people thought, the bottom's going to drop out the market, companies going to run out of cash, these things are going to go to the wall?
Yeah, I don't think it was structural. I think we're seeing now that people adapt very quickly to new ways of working and new ways of doing diligence and getting to know people and gaining sort of trust or confidence in businesses. I think the pause and the sort of taking stock was a genuine, more like you said in the latter case, nobody knowing how long and how deep maybe the impact of the pandemic would be. People wanting to hold on to cash to just try and interpret some of the data points that were coming in, understanding whether or not there was going to be sort of a rolling effect, whether or not, you were going to see spending power decrease dramatically, whether or not you were going to see, from the top of the, cycle, the capital flows being held onto because of concerns about property, real estate, pension funds, longer term investment plans. And so I think people were genuinely just holding on to cash for most of the second quarter in anticipation of what might come. And I think the fact that they're flowing again means that people have a good sense for where their capital is coming from, whether or not they'll be able to, basically afford or, continue to sustain their levels of interest and investment, and therefore confidence that the economy is still very long-term focused, still very bullish about technology, and certainly seeing the trends about how much even more important that is for everyone across the world.
James, what Eileen's describing there seems to be a sort of wobble in confidence, which mercifully has passed in the sector. For the larger end companies, I mean, you work with the Hut Group, which is, of course, now doing fantastically well. For those edging towards a stock market flotation, possibly worth in the hundreds of millions or billions, what have we seen at that end of the startup trend? Confidence, wobbles, reevaluations of valuations, maybe what Eileen was describing there, a wobble which has now passed. What was your experience of the last 9 months?
Yes, well, first of all, I must say thank you for putting me on a panel with Alice and Eileen, because obviously they invest at an earlier stage than we do normally. It gives me a good sense of what we're going to see in about 6 months to 12 months' time. The overall, because we invest in businesses which can be anywhere from 10 to 1,000 people, a lot of our businesses did have to go through the upheaval of remote work and readjust how they're working. And they had to go through an upheaval in their budget plans, right? Everyone's 2020 budget was thrown out the window. And that's especially acute when you're a fast growing startup and you're expecting to hire a significant number of people within a year and grow very, very quickly. The great thing about working with startups, though, and the best startups, they're learning engines and they adapt very, very quickly. And that's what we look for when we invest. And that's what we saw a lot of our portfolio manage to do. So many of the businesses, like you mentioned, the Hut Group, Revolut, larger organizations that have thousands of employees, managed to shift to remote work very quickly, and actually coming out of Q2 and into Q3, suddenly found themselves on the receiving end of a huge amount of interest in growth. Because ultimately those learning machines, those agile startups, were able to adapt to a new environment quicker than perhaps traditional brick and mortar retailers. So if you take an organization like the Hut Group, well, they were on the receiving end of growth, while a lot of brick and mortar health and beauty organizations struggled with an online world. And I think as we continue to see a huge amount of GDP, global GDP, and in Britain move online, these scale-up organizations will probably be able to capture more of that opportunity.
I mean, that's fascinating. What it strikes me is that all three of you are saying there, from the founder entry into wanting to become an entrepreneur at Alice's end with EF, to Eileen with early stage investment, to James with later stage investment, that the tech scene is fantastically robust, rather confirming what we suspected. What I want to move on to now is this idea that, you know, Britain has long been derided as a nation of shopkeepers, and this idea that having your own business is a rather prosaic and parochial thing to do. And yet at the other end, we have this idea of the founder, this mythic character who can, this Bezos or this Musk, who can bestride the global stage and transform the world with enormous leadership potential. And what I want to know is, you know, what is the gap between this shopkeeper mentality and the founder mentality? And can we help in some way transform the one into the other? Are they perhaps closer than we imagine? What are the characteristics of founders which set them apart? Because I think we credit them with a lot of mystique, and I think maybe that puts people off when they think, oh, I can't possibly do that. You know, I'm no Elon Musk, I'm no Jeff Bezos. Well, you know, on our Tech 100 list, we've had founders who are 28 who got chucked out of college and worked in their parents' garage. I'm thinking of Ben Francis here. Gymshark's now doing fantastically well. So, you know, young people can easily be discouraged, and, you know, the unemployment figures for them are 14.5% of people between 16 and 24 are unemployed at the moment. The unemployment has disproportionately affected them. So how do we encourage them not to lose heart that they too can be founders? Alice, let me come to you, because at EF often talk about the characteristics needed to be a founder, but is that maybe discouraging? Do we put people off from wary of being that they're not up to, you know, they don't have the right stuff?
It's a really interesting question. To be honest, it's something that we think about a lot at EF. One of our core beliefs is that the world is missing out on some of its best founders. And largely, one of the biggest reasons why the world is missing out on those founders is because of very strong cultural norms about what an aspirational and ambitious career path looks like. You know, we always asked, why doesn't the UK or why doesn't Europe have a Google? And I suppose our answer to that would be Larry and Sergey probably would have ended up in a hedge fund. Because in the UK, if you're super smart, you're graduating from a fantastic technical degree, actually the most obvious thing to do is to probably go into finance. So one of our strong beliefs is that places like the UK, places like Europe, places like Asia does have the talent to build these globally important companies. It's just that they're held back by these cultural norms and cultural constraints, parental pressure, peer pressure, that means that they don't see being a founder as an aspirational career path. And I think what's really exciting is we are beginning to see that change very, very rapidly, particularly here in the UK. So yes, we might have been a nation of shopkeepers in the past. I think what we're beginning to see is a realization, coming back to this idea about having a significant impact. Highly ambitious, highly talented individuals seeing the way to have an impact as through a startup, and particularly through a technology startup, where your ability to scale to impact millions of people on a pretty slim budget is pretty incredible. So yes, I think the UK has produced some pretty fantastic startups, particularly in the last kind of decade. But I suppose I'm even more excited about the next decade, where just the pipeline of talent that we're now pulling from those traditional career paths into entrepreneurship means that the future is looking very bright.
Thanks so much. Eileen, what do you see? What are the key characteristics you look for in a founder when you're thinking about investing? You know, imagine that there's someone out there with a great idea, a 25-year-old or a 22-year-old coming straight out of university, or maybe doing an apprenticeship, and they come up with an idea. What are the characteristics of that person that you're looking for?
Yeah, no, so, and by the way, they could be 42, 52. I don't think we're looking very sort of age narrowly or age specifically. But I agree with Alice that there's so much more to cultivate from here in the UK. I would also, though, agree with, I think, the underlying premise or the implication in your original question, which is that being a nation of shopkeepers, I don't think that puts the UK at a disadvantage. I actually think a lot of the characteristics are very similar. It's just that our shops of the future are going to be online and they're all digital. And so I think then, to come back and tie a circle around all of your questions, characteristics we look for are certainly, individuals and entrepreneurs who are really interested in how services and products are going to be delivered online. They're going to be using enabling technology, how therefore they can reach more people, expand sort of markets, and probably increase accessibility for more people and more customers. We want to see a tenacity, we want to see resilience. We look primarily for conviction. A lot of times people are motivated by many different things, but we've seen that sometimes people are motivated by family pressure, as Alice was talking about, maybe turned on its head. We've also seen people wanting to compete with previous employers or employees or managers. We usually see somebody with something to prove, and that's a conviction that's got to carry them through, the most difficult of journeys and really the greatest of challenges. So we look primarily for that motivation and that conviction that's going to see them all the way through.
James, we've talked a lot about technical skills, about the essential nature of having STEM subjects taught throughout school and trying to get more students interested in STEM subjects, particularly women and girls interested in science and technical subjects. But so many of the people we see on our Tech 100 list of top entrepreneurs are coming out of consultancy, are coming out of the city. I don't think these people can code. I just think they have access to capital and good contacts. I mean, that's pretty important as well. And does that need to change?
Yeah, and I think that some of the issues within the UK have already been mentioned, but there is a big pull from consultancy and accounting and banking. And that pull continued to some extent after 2008. Although we do expect that actually following this crisis, as Alice said, more and more people are going to want to play a positive role in changing and building the world they want to see. And so it will inspire more entrepreneurs. I think one of the big challenges we have to get over as a country is that idea that being a nation of small shopkeepers is a bad thing. And as Eileen rightly picked up, actually early experiences of entrepreneurship, whether that's selling, I work with a company called Depop, whether that's selling clothes online and remaking clothes as a teenager, whether it's setting up a Shopify store and having your first experience of e-commerce. These are things that don't require deep knowledge of tech or coding, but they do require an ambition and a drive to change something and to take responsibility for building an organization and for understanding the key bits of what a customer wants and how you can provide it. And I think that generation now, which are experiencing these tools for the first time, are the ones which we're most excited by in terms of investing in entrepreneurs. The ecosystem surrounding people in the UK is also increasing rapidly. And if you look at the advantages Silicon Valley have, one of the big things is they've had now probably 3 or 4 generations of large technology and software businesses which have trained people up, given them management responsibilities, got them to know the industry, and many of them have spun out and started their own businesses. Now we're seeing that in the UK. To take one example, Go Cardless, which is a business that both Eileen and Passion and Balderton have invested in. 2 of the founders there have gone on to start their own businesses, Nested and Monzo, which other people have continued to invest in, and now early employees of Monzo are leaving to start their own businesses. So we're seeing this ecosystem start to develop, and so I hope we do see more entrepreneurs and role models taking those learnings from the Valley and starting to build larger and larger businesses, so that we can have more people like the ones you mentioned to inspire next generation of entrepreneurs.
Fascinating. And does that mean that this cascading effect cements a location? Do you have to be in London if you want to be in tech in the UK? And also, should you aim to build on an existing cluster of expertise? Clearly, we're strong in fintech. Clearly, we have Oxford and Cambridge and London, these fantastic universities with life sciences, drug discovery, biology, cutting edge biotech. Is that, if you want to be the next, Britain's answer to Sergey Brin, do you have to think, I'm going to be in London and I'm going to be in biotech? Do you have to pick winners, or can you start anywhere? James, I'll come back to you very briefly.
Well, I have to believe that you can start anywhere. Our last, as you mentioned, the Hut Group, the most recent IPO tech business in the UK, I think, was started in Crewe and South Manchester, which is where I'm from. And there weren't a huge number of tech businesses to learn from up there when Matt started the business, but he did manage a huge amount of talent. And I do believe there was a point where a majority of Oxbridge computer science graduates were either going to the Hut Group or Entrepreneur First. I think it was the two leading recruiters. So you can certainly build businesses almost anywhere. And I don't think it's about building clusters, but it's certainly about learning from where we've had successes. So understanding why fintech has been a success in the UK and trying to apply those learnings, everything from open banking and supporting the ecosystem to a friendly regulatory experience, and applying that to other clusters. I think you can do that. I don't think that it's easy for government to pick winners, but it's certainly easy for government to make it easier for other industries to catch up.
Eileen, what about you? Are there sectors which are particularly hot for the UK and where you would encourage people to go, or do you think they just ought to follow their passion?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what James said, which probably makes this a very boring panel for you to moderate. But I think that you can start from anywhere. But I do think it'll probably help if you start where there's an existing cluster, because you'll have that support sort of network that James was starting to allude to, that we now have as in terms of sort of multi-generational founders. You'll have easier access to capital. You'll have the advice. You'll have, like I said, a network and support to sort of bolster the impetus and the origin or the starting of a business. But I do think there are also, so I think both things can be true, there are also some unique strengths that the UK has that I'm hoping will continue to leverage and expand upon. So you mentioned fintech, of course, that's one. As James mentioned, we're both invested in Alice as well. We've all got, a number of portfolio companies that are in fintech because of the great benefits that we have here in the UK. You mentioned biotech, medtech. We're also, leaders in the world in terms of educational systems and norms and resources. So edtech should be another natural example. But I don't think there's a limit to what founders can create coming out of the UK. What we see a lot of times is that consumer propositions come first because founders look to solve problems that they might have experienced themselves. And then you start to see these kinds of challenges or these resources and these problem solving skills going into the enterprise or into a business to business context. And so therefore, I think any sector is up for grabs, and absolutely founders should absolutely follow their passion, because when I mentioned the conviction point earlier, if it's not something that a founder or an entrepreneur absolutely feels in their belly and is going to get up every morning to try and tackle, then it's not going to be as successful as any of us would want them to be.
Thanks so much. Alice, do you see the applicants to EF come in every day, sort of filter down into very clear segments of UK startup society, whether it be biotech, medtech, or edtech, or fintech? Do you see noticeable trends and clusters, or is it very scattered?
So when we ask people to apply to EF, we actually don't ask them to provide an idea. We don't evaluate them based on their idea. And to very much Eileen's point, we're looking for entrepreneurs who can come in and have conviction and passion around something. Where we see entrepreneurs struggle is when they come in and they say, "Oh, I hear fintech's hot. Tell me what's getting invested in within fintech, and I'll build that." That doesn't work. The entrepreneur isn't sticky enough with the idea, and investors can smell that. I think just to your previous question around location, I think there are some really important clustering effects that do come from places, not just London, but also places like Edinburgh and Glasgow, where, around Glasgow in particular is an amazing gaming hub. You do get these network effects of both former employees and investors. But one of the exciting impacts of the pandemic is that as we're doing now, video conferencing working becomes much more normal as work from home becomes almost the norm within the tech industry. It does mean that now, I think for startups, it's much easier to be based all around the UK, all around the globe. One of the interesting impacts we've seen of this kind of shift is that as we do our demo days, we're seeing more and more US investors, for example, meeting our startups on video conferencing in a way that they never would have made the effort to come over to be in the UK in person previously. So I think we are seeing a breakdown of geography, and the pandemic is going to accelerate that, which I think largely will be a good thing in terms of making sure that talent is accessible regardless of where it's based.
Fascinating. So we might see some of the benefits of that sort of clustering effect carried out remotely now that everyone is so much more willing to operate through teleconferencing and the like. Alice?
Yes, very much so.
Brilliant. Now, Eileen, you've talked previously about wartime CEOs, about fortress balances. You know, we've had 9 months of very worrying times economically. That all sounds very militaristic. Is it that tough to be a founder? Can you be a soft and gentle type and still make a success of life in the startup world?
I think there are many ways to sort of solve a problem and also to get people to rally. And so I think, again, I'm going to answer in the most boring way and say yes to both sides of your question. I think it is incredibly tough, and it requires a person with really resilient character in order to start a company. And it depends on what their ambitions are. If it is going to be, a business that's sustainable with a small team of, 10 to 20 people, perhaps you don't have to deal with, human dynamics and personality conflicts as much as you might for a 1,000-person organization. But I think when something like a global pandemic hits, in any of those situations, you've got to think about so many things at once, that you're worried about your team, you're worried about their fortitude, you're worried about their experiences at home and whether or not they're feeling enough support, and then if they can bring their best to work. And then you're thinking about at work, how do you get people to rally? How do you solve the problems? How do you prioritize what the key problems are? And so I do think you have to have that resiliency and that fortitude that one would want probably in a wartime situation. I don't think, though, that's mutually exclusive to being kind, to being fair, to having really high integrity. And so maybe the word you use, soft, might not be applicable, but I think it is probably in some cases. You probably do have to be soft when you're trying to deliver certain messages and when you're starting, to try and motivate people in a different way. But you have to really be able to focus, and you have to really be able to jump into the key priorities. And that's probably why people use that wartime sort of metaphor so much. But I really do hope that it brings out the best of people as well.
Thanks so much. Now we've got 5 minutes left. I wanted to ask you each a couple of final questions. First of all, the Chancellor has spent an absolutely vast sum of money already trying to prop up the economy during this pandemic. We know that there's going to be a big tax black hole and there are going to be grab bags here and there. What do you think, each of you, and I'll start with you, James, do you think the government could do more of to encourage entrepreneurship? And are you worried that because of the demands that they're going to be on Rishi Sunak to balance the books, some of those encouraging, whether it's seed schemes or allowances for entrepreneurs, whether they will go by the wayside? So what do each of you think the government needs to do, and what do you worry it might to foster startup entrepreneurship, starting with you, James?
Well, look, my job, and I think perhaps everyone around the table's job, is to allocate capital to talent, right? So historically, people put money into machines for big industry, or in finance, put money for leverage. We put money into talent, into great people, hiring great people and training great people. And I fundamentally believe that's the best allocation of capital. And I think that the Treasury should think that way too. So the more that we can do now to invest in better training and reskilling and educational opportunities for people beyond, including and beyond university, I think is really important. And I think that's the best ROI, as it were, for UK PLC, and making sure that that investment goes to a different way of learning. So not just £40,000 a year business schools, although they are good. Other types of adaptive education for people, I think, is really important. So if I were to give advice to the Treasury, it would always be to invest in people, invest in talent. I think that's number one. And the second thing I'd say is that it is important to encourage investment. We are in a competitive environment for talent. People can move around still. And so we don't want to be massively out of line in terms of the way we provide financial incentives to entrepreneurs versus our European and international colleagues. But ultimately, I've never met a successful entrepreneur who was in it for the money, right? Most people are here if they're building a business because they fundamentally believe that something needs to change in the world. And so I'm not too concerned about tax raises here or there, because ultimately that's not why most entrepreneurs go into it.
Fascinating. Eileen, what about you? Do you agree that it's not about the stock options? It's really about the best thing the government could do is just keep pumping money into education and different forms of education?
Yeah, I do agree for the most part. I would probably add one more layer to that, which is I think, what founders want more than anything is great talent for their teams. And certainly, obviously, as investors, we want the same. in order to build world-leading companies, we need to have first-rate teams, and we need to be able to attract talent, obviously domestically, which is why what James says about education and those programs and those resources are so important. But we also still need to attract internationally as well. Every hub in the world, including Silicon Valley, competes for international talent, and so we need to be able to do the same thing in order to make the UK to continue to be a really first-rate destination for talent. That's what I'd like to see the government focus on. I agree with James that founders don't start businesses for tax breaks. But continuing to support R&D tax credits, for example, would also be incredibly helpful, and just continue to signal to talent that the UK remains really committed to growing the sector.
And visas, Eileen, just, if we need to attract international talent, do we need to make sure that it can get here, presumably, and that they're welcome and we give them visas?
Yeah, no, indeed. Sorry, that is my point. I was probably trying to be too subtle about that. But yes, I want to see corridors, visas, and support for immigration, especially highly skilled immigration, but it can't just be limited to too many, restrictive roles.
And Alice, to you, do you see everyone just coming out of computer science grads, coming out of Oxbridge, or is there a diversity of your applicants and people you take, and what do you think the government can do to broaden that diversity?
Well, just to support Eileen's point, one of the most important things the government has done recently is to bring back the graduate visa. That means that graduates now have 2 years that they can stay in the UK before having to return to their home country, where they can get a job without a visa. This is something that I think 4 or 5 years ago, when this was in place, we saw a huge amount of talent coming to us based on that visa, and definitely made our life harder when that visa went away. I suppose just thinking about another request for the government, I think thinking about the government, but also about the public sector. The public sector is going to be sort of forced to go through very rapid innovation and change and technological adoption over the next couple of years. I suppose one example of this is we have a company in our portfolio called Accurix, and what they do is communication tools for GP practices, doctors' practices. And at the beginning of the pandemic, they were starting off basically doing messaging for GPs, so sort of text messaging. Over the course of a weekend, they ran a hackathon as a team and built a platform that allowed GPs to do video calls with their patients. 4 days later, that was rolled out to 3,500 GP practices across the UK. That's half of the GP practices in the UK. It's now in 98% of GP practices in the UK. So really pushing forward the idea of telemedicine. And this is a very small team that's been able to have a huge impact on the kind of British healthcare system in a very short period of time. That's not the only example, and it's not the only example that we're going to see over the next couple of years. So I think making sure that the public sector is ready, equipped, and able to adopt a lot of the technological push that we're going to see over the next couple of years that's been driven by the pandemic, whether it's in medtech, whether it's in edtech, whether it's in legal tech. I think the government does need to be ready for that and help smooth some of those procurement processes as well.
Well, I'd like to thank all three of our fantastic panelists for that really fascinating and interesting session on why and how you should go in and become a startup founder and what the challenges are, because I do think there is this sort of mystique around it, and to try and demystify the process for people is really great to hear. And, just speaking to what Alice was saying there at the end, clearly there is a man at the centre of government who is keen on accelerating change and technological adoption within the civil service. That's Dom Cummings. And we know that there is going to be huge change. And we're just going to come on and talk about that in the next session about health tech. But for the moment, I want to thank our three panelists very much for their amazing contributions to this about how to become a startup and why you should become a startup founder in this recession. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Eileen. And thank you so much, James.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.